Hello, everybody. Good evening to everybody. We are starting our workshop now, which is for internationally trained lawyers. I would like to welcome our viewers who are watching us on Facebook Live too, as well as all the people that are attending it via Zoom. So just a few things before we start the workshop. The first thing is we would like to thank our program funders, which is IRCC, because without the fundings, these workshops are not possible. We are really thankful to them for the funding that they provide us. And a few housekeeping rules. Please keep your microphones on mute and please keep your cameras turned off. No abusive language will be tolerated. Please do not post any personal information in the chat box. And please save questions for the end of the workshop and you type them in the chat and we will be taking up your questions and the presenter will be answering the questions. An evaluation link will be sent out at the end of the workshop and we really appreciate your feedback because it helps us to make our workshops better. So these were my slides and I would invite Denise to share her slides now. And Denise is our presenter who has graciously agreed to present. And she is, I know she's super busy. She's got so much on her plate, but with all those things, Denise has agreed to do this. Thank you so much, Denise, and welcome to the workshop. And the floor is yours now, Denise.
Awesome.
We can see your slides perfectly.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate everyone's patience and having it rescheduled for today. I wasn't feeling very well at our last scheduled meeting. So I do welcome you all. We have lots of information to go through. I'm certainly happy to share a PDF of the PowerPoint after if anybody wants to refer to it, but it's a lot of information going on. And so we're going to get right to it. Happy to entertain any questions. If you need to, please let me know as we go along, any questions that you have. I don't know that I can see them. So if you guys want to interrupt me in some way.
No, I will be reading the questions, Denise. So okay. I'll be there.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're talking to people who have graduated from a law school outside of Canada. And when that's happened and you come back to Canada, there's a process that you have to go through, of course, for accreditation to make sure that you can practice law in Alberta. Now, I'm admitted to the law in Alberta and each of the territories. And so that's been a process over the course of my 30 years of experience. I do have a lawyer joining me in January who did go through this process. So I did get a lot of feedback from her about how she felt about the process and the length of time that it took her to get that. So I'm probably going to be giving you a little bit of information that she gave me on her feedback while we go through it. So the first place you have to start is the NCA. So that's the National Committee of Accreditation. So if you don't have a Canadian common law degree, which most of you won't have, then you have to have your degree evaluated by this committee. And so they are doing the evaluations for everyone across Canada, no matter where it is that you want to practice. When you do apply, you've got to let them know where it is you intend to practice, but it is a national standard that goes all across the federations of law societies in Canada. So they're going to look at your credentials and your experience and decide what it is you need to learn to practice law in Canada. And so it applies to Canadian citizens who have earned their degrees overseas and newcomers to Canada who have overseas degree, or people even thinking of immigrating to Canada. So you don't have to actually be physically in Canada to apply at the NCA for your information and to get qualified. So there's 5 things that we have to go through in getting that qualification. And the first is figuring out if you even qualify to apply. Then we actually have to go through the application process. You will then get assessed by the NCA and they'll tell you what you need to do to complete your qualification. And finally, you get the lovely certificate saying that you're ready to go in the province that you choose to practice in. So the NCA has a self-assessment form, and that's going to find out if you qualify on your own, and you're going to want to look at that up. NCA Legal answers tons of your questions, as does the Alberta Law Society. internationally trained student website. So welcome and encourage you all to go and look there for that information. But the self-assessment form is under the NCAA process self-assessment, and I did go through it myself because I wanted to see how difficult it was, and it wasn't actually that lengthy. It was just an application form. So that's kind of the starting process, and they want to pay special attention to your education and your professional background. So they're going to want to know what courses you studied in law school, what area of law you may have practiced in the country that you graduated from, and they use one standard of evaluation across the country. So even though we have federal legislation that applies across Canada and provincial legislation specific to each province, and Quebec is a whole new school all on its own, they do, for the NCAA, apply one standard across the board. So you can know when you're getting that accreditation that it would apply whether you were in Alberta or BC or Ontario or anywhere else that you want to practice. So they're going to want official documents, of course, when you're doing your application, which makes sense. So you might as well, if you're considering this, get those documents in order, because it does take some time, of course, to get certified or official transcripts from the university. Transcripts from your legal education, so both your first degree and your law degree. And if you only, of course, went straight through into your university or college that gave you your law degree, then of course just that program. It will ask you for a resume outlining your work experience and education. And this, I think that you should take your time and be very, very detailed on. Sometimes thoughts and considerations that we have that we just took for granted might be very, very important. So if you did any actual practice of law in another country, I would recommend that you sit down and think of what an average day was about. And did you learn how to open files? Did you learn about accounting? Did you learn about ethics? And did you have client meetings and interviews and applying before the court? And be as detailed as possible so that they know your entire experience. You don't want to just limit it to, well, I practiced in family law or I practiced in securities law. Get in there and give them the detail that they're looking for, because that will help them assess you and save you generally from having it come back to you to ask for additional questions. And finally, if you're a lawyer in good standing in that country, they want a copy of that certificate or your card saying that you're a member in good standing in that area. If the documents are in a language other than English or French, they will want them translated. And so you have to think of that in mind. So again, as we're ordering transcripts from a university that's not local to Canada, if it comes in another language, you're going to want that officially translated for them. And so think of what kind of time period. So if it takes 6 weeks to get your transcripts and then it takes another 3 weeks to get them translated, you want to think about that period of time as you're going along, and maybe create a timeline for yourself to understand, when am I going to get an answer from the accreditation committee, because it's going to take time for you to get everything together, and you're anxious obviously to keep or start practicing in Canada. And so keep those dates in mind for yourself. The application will not be processed until everything is together, and it does cost $350 plus GST to apply for that accreditation, and it must be paid by credit card. So they don't take checks or e-transfers. They want a credit card to have that paid. So keep that in mind as well. And make sure that you've got a credit card available. So once you've put that together, so your transcripts, your resume, and all that detail, you've paid the fee, then they're going to sit down and assess your credentials and make sure that you can be admitted into one of our law societies. So they're going to look at that education and experience, and they're going to measure it against our national requirements. So you can actually get a copy of that policy manual. This is a long web link. And so I don't expect you to write it down while we're talking. But again, it's under that NCA Legal's information, and it will give you the entire policy. So at any time, I guess if you're quarantined now, or we're spending more time at home over the next month, and you want to read their entire policy manual, you certainly have access to it. And in a lot of ways, I found it really helpful to go through it because I was curious as to what things they weighed different values on. And so on the one hand, I thought it was important. On the other hand, it's certainly not a requirement of your application that you understand all of the policies of the committee, but it was kind of nice to just go through it and have a grasp of what they were looking for and why they were looking for it. So under their particular importance, they want to know about your substantive legal knowledge. Okay, so what's all ticking in here in our brains, and what knowledge that we have that's substantive, and that what can be translated into that Canadian common law. So there's 8 core subjects. Feels like you're back in law school, I know. But there's 8 core subjects that they're looking at. And so for me, if I was applying, I would want to address these 8 subjects in my resume and talk to them as much as I can about my experience, even if it's not in Canadian law, but in a similar law, because I think that that will go to your evaluation and how much detail they need you to take to get those 8 core subjects satisfied. So our Canadian administrative law, constitutional law, criminal law, our professional responsibility. So that's how we treat our clients and each other. The foundations of Canadian law. So is something a contract? Is it a tort? Is it negligence? Is it fraud? Those kinds of basic things that you would have learned probably in your first year of law school. And again, contracts, property, and torts. So you want to tailor your resume because these are the 8 things that they care about. So let them know what experience you've had, and have you taken a contracts class? Have you taken a torts class or a property law class? Because that will help them know what they're going to assign to you to get that qualification in Canada. So most candidates are required to complete competencies in administrative, constitutional, criminal law, professional responsibility, and foundations. So those are the 5 that they generally tell everyone who comes to Canada, you're going to have to take these courses and get your equivalency to Canadian law on those 5 areas. So those are the most important, and those are generally the assignments that they give you. And ultimately, once they say that those are the assignments, you have to decide, am I going to take the NCA equivalent courses, or am I going to go to law school for a year and take it that way? Because quite frankly, right now with COVID and most of the classes being all online, it's a little bit easier to take those courses and still be able to maintain a job rather than attending school full time. So the one with all the negatives of COVID, the one thing with online learning is that it's made the actual university classes more available to foreign students or to people who are wanting to take those classes evenings, nights, or weekends and try to work their work schedule around it. So I do think that's something that you're going to have to consider. So in your skills course, there's 3 national requirements for your skills. So we've talked about your core subjects and your substantive legal knowledge, so that they want to know what's in your brain, and now they want to know what your skills are. So what's in your brain and what kind of skills you have. So your 3 skills are problem solving, which kind of makes sense. In Alberta, in Canada, before we apply to law school, we write the law school admittance test. People refer to it as the LSAT. I'm not sure if in the country that you were admitted to, there was an equivalent type of entrance exam. And that entrance exam really gave away people's problem solving skills. And so it was a really good indicator of your ability to practice law if you did well on that exam. And so when you're thinking about your skills and your problem solving process, if you ever want to look at an LSAT exam or look at samples of those questions, they're online all over the place. It's a good way to evaluate how you're doing in that whole problem solving process. They also want to know if you can do research, which I have to tell you, back in the days where we rode horses to school back and forth and uphill both ways, I'm kidding. Research was very, very different when I graduated law school. When I graduated law school, we didn't have computers. We didn't have the internet. There was no emails. I know that's dating myself, and I'm sorry. But really, our research was going to the libraries and looking up cases and looking up textbooks to try to understand the law better. Now, everything's at a click of the button. Every court decision is available immediately. We're not waiting for it to be published, but you still have to be able to know how to research an issue. If somebody brings you a question that you're not sure the answer, how is your ability to research what that skill is like? And then, of course, your communication skill, and that's both oral and written. And so to me, if the National Association is looking for those skills, these are really important skills also for you to identify if you're applying for a job. Talk about your problem solving skills, talk about your research skills, talk about your communication. And it's really important that when you're writing that resume that you realize it's a reflection of yourself. And so your communication skills are very, very obvious in a cover letter, an email, your resume, all of that information when you're applying for a job. And so as lawyers, I want to make sure that you can solve a problem, right? I want to make sure that if you don't know how to solve the problem, you can research it and figure it out, and that you're going to be able to then communicate it either to the court or to our client as to what the solution is. So kind of think of those three things as that's part of what we do every day in law. And all of you that have practiced in your country that you obtained your degree from know that that's an everyday occurrence. Even if you're doing the same thing over and over again, it all has to deal with problem solving, coming up with the solution and being able to communicate it to the court or to your client. So when we talk about ethics and professionalism, of course, that's again, both knowledge and skills. So we're back to our brain and what we can do with it. And so we want to make sure that you know the relevant legislation, the rules of professional conduct, case law, all that kind of stuff. And we want to make sure that you have the skills, once you know that, how to make informed, reasonable decisions. I think that that's really important. And I think in a lot of ways we have, over the past 30 years, at least that I've seen, moved away from really stressing the importance of understanding our obligations to ourselves and to our clients. We do a lot of lawyer defense work through the Alberta Lawyers Assurance Association now. Anyway, it's the insurance that we pay for to, in case we make a mistake and we have to have coverage. We do a lot of work for them, and we see a lot of mistakes that are made. And some of it really does come down to our conduct and our ability to make those reasoned decisions in ethical situations. And I can tell you, as first-time lawyers or as new lawyers to the country, you are very much targeted by fraudsters and by people who want to get away with stuff. And so super, super important that once you start practicing that you're making those informed decisions, that if you don't know, you're looking for a mentor at the Law Society, you're looking for a mentor through the Canadian Bar Association, that you're talking to your principal or other lawyers in your office, but that you have that team or resource around you to help you make those decisions. Because there are people out there who will put a lot of pressure on you to make those deals go through really quickly. And one of the most recent scams that is going around is that lawyers will get an email saying, can you help me sue for these widgets that I sold to this guy? So I sold him these widgets and he hasn't paid me. Will you issue a demand letter for the payment, and hopefully I'll get that back? And then immediately after you issue the demand letter, you get a huge sum of money sent to you in payment and satisfaction of that debt. But this is where the kicker is. That money is usually fraudulent. It's either a forged check or a false bank account. You put it through your trust account and they're bugging you for the money, and you cut the check back out to them and the money bounces in your trust account and you're liable. And so it's been hugely popular over the last 3 or 4 years to try to get lawyers anxious for business on the hook for this money that comes in automatically, because if you are in litigation, the requirements to identify your client are less. And so it's something that people target. So just make sure that you've got a good team around you, that you can make these ethical decisions. Does this smell right? Did that money come too soon? Something seems wrong here. Why would they need a lawyer to do that if they paid it right away? And just be aware that there is daily people out there looking to catch you as a lawyer to make those kinds of mistakes. And so super important that we're thinking about our ethics and professionalism. That substantial legal knowledge, they talk about foundations of law. So that's common law and equity, statutory construction and analysis, and administration of law in Canada. So how do our laws come into force and effect? How are they implemented? What happens when the court decides or considers that legislation? How do they interpret it? So that's one of the basics that they want you to know is, how do we make a law? How does it come into force and effect? And how is it considered by the court once it does come into force and effect? Can it be set aside? Can it be implemented? Is it something that's absolute? They want to make sure you have knowledge of that foundation. Then they want to talk about both public law and private law. So public law being the Constitution, our criminal law system, and principles of Canadian administrative law. And so we're kind of talking basically about what are we ever going to be arguing in court? And then what are our private law principles, contracts, torts, property law, have that basic understanding as well. So what they're trying to do is, they know that all of these type substantive knowledges are taught in Canadian law schools. They want to make sure that you're getting taught the same thing. So once they've reviewed your resume and your application, your transcripts, they're going to decide what assignments you are required to do to get your certificate of qualification. So that's going to basically say, once you're done this, it's the same as graduating from law school in Canada. So how is that going to happen? You can do it either by writing your NCA exams or taking courses at a Canadian law school. And so, or doing a combination of both. This really comes down to, maybe for you, it's more logical to go to law school for a year in the city that you're in and take 5 courses and be done with it in a year. Otherwise, maybe it isn't logical. Maybe you've got to make a living and you've got to be paying your bills. And so doing it on your own time while you're working full time is the more logical way to do it. And so really, you're going to have to weigh that. And right now, again, with classes being taught online, that might be a possibility to do it through a Canadian law school, or 1 or 2 of the classes that are taught early in the morning or later at night, or on these days that you're not working. It might make sense for you to take those courses. A lot of people end up taking the NCA exams because they can be done at their own time, right? So in addition to taking those assignments, not exams, sorry, you have to be able to communicate in English and or French. And they may actually require you to complete language testing. So again, make sure that when you're putting your application in, that your sentence structure is clear, that you've clearly communicated what you want to present to the accreditation committee, because if they think that your language, even in the application, is not clear, then they may require you to have a language testing to make sure that you can speak and communicate well in either French or English. You have, of course, a deadline, which in this case is 5 years to complete your assignment. So unlike law school, where you may go to school for 4 months and then you're done, if you're doing them on your own timeline, you actually have 5 years to complete that. So I guess you could take a class at university every 5 years, one every 5 years and be done, but you do have 5 years time to have it done. So once you have all of your assignments done, you then upload that completion and request your certificate. So that will say that that you have proven your knowledge of Canadian law, and similar to somebody who got a law degree in Canada. So it's not the same as getting a Bachelor of Laws or a Juris Doctorate that we call it now, which is silly to me. So in Canada, about 10 years ago, Canadians were complaining because in the US, they changed the designation of a graduating lawyer to Juris Doctorate. So they were getting essentially a doctorate degree for completing what we would consider a master's level class. So it's your second degree. In Alberta, it's 7 years. So first degree in 4 years, your law school degree in 3 years. And so Canada didn't like that they could get this in the US, but we were still calling it a Bachelor of Laws. And so they complained, and the Law Society said, fine, it's okay. You want to be Juris Doctorates, then okay, we'll change the name of the degree. And so they have. And so we are all technically, I'm Dr. Hendrix, if I want to be called that, because my degree does say I have a doctorate, but it's not the same as getting your bachelor's degree, then getting a master's degree, and then getting a doctorate degree. It is not the same at all. We just have the fancy title because somebody was complaining that it wasn't the same as the US. So again, keep that in mind. If you complete this program, you're not going to get a Juris Doctorate. You still have your law degree from the country you went to law school, but it just proves that you have the same substantive knowledge as somebody who came out of a Canadian law school. So you've completed that. So what next? I have to tell you that the lady that I spoke to, who's joining us in January, she took about 3 years to complete her accreditation. She had a family and 3 children. She was working full time, so she chose the NCA route rather than going to university because that worked for her economically and in her timeline. She found that the courses were tough, but not too difficult, that they were equivalent to any standard university assignments and testing. But that it was stressful for her to be working a full-time job and trying to take those courses and do it within the timeline that she had set for herself. She had known someone who was doing a similar process as her, but this other person wrote all 5 exams in one day. And so that's an option too. She took all 5 assignments and did all 5 classes at the same time and then wrote all 5 exams and passed them. And so Beverly had done it over 3 years, but this other person had done it all kind of in 3 or 4 months. And so the timeline is yours depending upon your availability. If you have financial responsibilities and children, it might not be an option for you to do all 5 at once. But you do have that 5-year time period, and you just have to think about what you want to do during that process. For her, she was working as a paralegal during that process because she wanted the cultural background of law, and she wanted to feel what it was like to be in different law offices during that time period. And so she was getting experience not as a student at law or an articling student, but as somebody who had her law degree and wanted to understand the culture, the technology, and the practice in a law firm while she was doing that. So it is one option to do that. Highly recommend that you do try to find a position if you're taking your NCA exams in something related to law, or at least related to the area of law that you would like to practice in. So what happens next? You've passed all your exams. You've been accredited to have the same kind of knowledge as any student coming out of law school in Canada. Now you have to apply for the bar admission program. So you can apply for a bar admission anywhere across Canada except Quebec. They have different requirements because they have a bunch of different provincial laws than we do across the country. So you can apply in Alberta, but taking that admissions course, that way you can apply anywhere in Canada. Now, I highly recommend that if you're going to take the courses in Alberta, then try to practice in Alberta. If you want to take the courses from Ontario, while they're standardized across the accreditation committee, they do tend to relate, and you will learn stuff about that specific provincial legislation and common law. And so I do think that there is a benefit to students who have learned in the jurisdiction in which they intend to practice. So for me and my class, I think that those people who went to school in Calgary had a better articling success and a better chance in getting articles. across Alberta than somebody who had gone to school in Ontario, just because the lawyers would know as their principals that they're going to have a higher learning curve in learning about the provincial areas of practice. So I did think it was advantageous to learn in the jurisdiction in which you want to practice. So you, like, if you want to practice in Alberta, then that's where you're going to apply next. In Ontario, they do have this Ryerson University Law Practice Program, and this is quite new. They implemented this practice because they found over the last 5 or 6 years that it has been very, very difficult for graduating lawyers to find articling positions. And there's just been a shift in how people want to practice and how big firms operate and their student retention, and just the focus in relation to law and what that practice is going to look like. And because of that, there was less articling students being hired. And so Ryerson University put together this 8-month intensive program where you do experimental training for 4 months and actual hands-on training for another 4 months. And it usually runs from August to April. And that link is the LPP, so lawpracticeprogram.ryerson.ca. And so essentially, instead of articling, you would take this program in Ontario. And again, not many Albertans do that. Not many people here would go to Ontario, but that is an option for you instead of looking for articles, that you could take that intensive program in Ontario. If you apply to the Law Society in Alberta, for example, you have to apply for student at law status and you have to complete the articling process. And right now that's about a year process in Alberta. Again, very different from when I was articling, but it still is an extensive process. To have that, you have got to go out there and find a lawyer to article for. So that 1 year period in which you're articling doesn't have to be with one lawyer. They've said that while you're doing the CPLED program, which is our Canadian Centre for Professional Legal Education, out of that 12 months, 9 months of it is spent doing work involving CPLED. And so you've got to complete an ethics program and an interviewing program and a court application and certain requirements so that they know at the end of your articles that you would be able to practice law and hang your own shingle on your own door. Now, I can tell you, Alberta is under much review, like the rest of the provinces, about whether or not this 1 year program is sufficient. And can somebody graduate from law school, article for 1 year, and then be competent enough to hang up their own shingle on their own door and practice law without supervision? Because technically, once you pass the bar, that's what you're entitled to do. And the law societies are really looking at that as to whether or not they are going to change that. And this is something they're considering for 2022 and 2023, about whether or not they're going to change the requirements to practice law, in that maybe you have to have a year of articling and 2 years of supervised legal work, and then another 2 years of just assistance in your legal work, to make sure that when you're out there, you're safe for yourself and you're safe for the public, and you can not only handle the academics of law, but the business of law. Because we have to remember that ultimately, no matter where you're practicing, you're not just a lawyer practicing law, you are running a business. And people get in a lot of trouble because, at least for me, nobody really taught us about the business of law. And I was blessed to have partners who really talked to me and taught me a lot about the business of law, and what is it like to hire staff, and what is it like to fire staff, and what are employment standards in Alberta, and what kind of healthcare benefits do you have to have, and do you have to have healthcare benefits, and what's your actual profit margin? And so if I'm charging $100 an hour, is that sufficient to pay my payroll and my GST and my rent? And all of those things that have nothing to do with whether or not you can close a real estate transaction or argue a criminal defense, but very, very important with respect to running your practice. And so the Law Society is saying, I don't know that we put enough emphasis on teaching people to not just be really good lawyers or very good academics, but also, how do I get clients? How do I retain clients? Do they like me? Do they not like me? Do I need somebody else to get clients and I'll do the work? Or should I get the clients and they do the work? Or should I work with 3 other people that I went to law school with or went through the NCA program with and I really like, but maybe we don't work well together? I have a great friend from law school who I love dearly, but there's no way we could practice together because I'm very multitasking, watching everything that everybody is doing. And she's got a very more laid back way about her. And so we don't mesh as far as our practices. Great friends, but our practices wouldn't complement each other. So you really want to find people that you're going to work with that you like. Please find people that you like. So you're going to complete that course, and it's going to include, for now, 9 months of the CPLED course. And this is the little summary about what the CPLED course is essentially meant to teach you. So you're teaching about your lawyer skills, your professional ethics and character. And more than anything, especially if you do court work, your professional ethics, your integrity is really the only thing you have. You're going to have good clients, you're going to have bad clients, you're going to have strong arguments and weak arguments, and your advocacy is really going to depend upon what facts come before you. But your integrity, your ethics before the court are priceless, because if they suspect that you're not being honest or not full of integrity, that you're not handling the file in a way that represents good standing and good lawyers in this province, if you lose that reputation before the courts, it's gone. And you will be impacted upon that throughout your entire practice. So, sorry, excuse me. Yeah, thank you. Sorry. And so you want to make sure that that is something that you hold to the highest standard. So if in your personal life, that's something that you're willing to compromise, I don't care. But when it comes to the practice of law, I absolutely care. And I want to make sure that when you say you're going to do X, you're going to do X, and I don't have to question it at all. And so it's become really important. But as you can see in this CPLED training, there really isn't anything in here about learning about the business of law. So I think that it's equally important. And I think that that's why they're talking about changing this course over the next few years. Because I think that you can be a great lawyer and you can have great ethics, but if you don't know how to read your financial statements and you don't know what that you should bill for a file because it's going to cost X amount of money to run your business each month, then you're going to fail. And so we have to be good business people too, and really take advantage of that, ask questions. I don't think that you have to get up into your boss's actual financial situation, but I do think you should have a really good understanding that if I practice criminal law and I spend this many hours on a criminal file, where am I making money and where am I not making money? So I think that that's why that trend is changing so much over the next couple of years. So composite articles are because, again, it's really difficult to find an articling position. And so they're saying you don't have to have one principal for all 12 months. You can split it up. You can have 2 to 10 principals. They can cover you over a period of time in that 12 months. And they're really opening this up. It never used to occur because they want to give people the opportunity to work in different, maybe smaller law firms that are very particularized in their practice. So you might go work for a family law firm for 3 months and a criminal law firm for 3 months and a real estate firm for 3 months and somewhere else for your last 3 months. But then you get a really good idea of what kind of practice you like, what kind of people that you like, and where you feel like you fit in. And so they're encouraging these composite articles because, of course, if you're stuck somewhere for a year and you hate it, it's not a lot of fun. And so they're really encouraging smaller firms to take articling students, but maybe for just a limited period of time, and encouraging students to consider working in smaller to mid-sized firms that practice in specific areas so they get a little bit more specialized articling treatment. So what are the benefits? Of course, for your students, you're exposed to a broader network, more lawyers, sorry, opportunity to work within a variety of different settings, learning different things from different principals in specific areas of law, and then try to figure out where you're a good fit. And so for the law firm, it's a smaller financial commitment, so they haven't agreed to hire you for a year. They're only paying you for however period of time. Shortest would be 1 month, and in a composite, the longest would be 8 months. It is a greater opportunity for smaller or rural firms to focus on getting help and realizing the diversity of their practice. Again, a manageable way that professionals get to meet students and learn more about them, and obviously a reduced sense of commitment to that student if you're only having them for a few months. So it's got benefits, I think, for both the students and for the lawyers. Now, during your articling year, you have to file an education plan relating to both your practical experience, training, and mentorship. And during that time period, both you and your principal are committing to your education and making sure that everything that little brain that we showed and the requirements that you have to complete those areas of law and learn those practical things are done in that year. So it's not just your commitment to learn them, it's the commitment of your principal to teach them. And so I kind of summarized everything that the Law Society of Alberta says has to be done in the CPLED course during your year. So ethics and professionalism, of course, learning how to resolve ethical issues, because you will come up with against them all the time. Even after 30 years, I was approached by some realtors who were looking to get listings in a foreclosure, and they said to me, "Oh, don't worry, we would pay you part of our commission." And I was like, "Pardon?" Never heard of such a thing. I'm like, "No, that's not ethical. That doesn't make sense to me. We have court-ordered listings, and they say very clearly how funds get distributed, and there's no kickback going on here." And they're like, "Oh yeah, no, all the lawyers do it." And I'm like, "No, that doesn't sound right to me." And even after 30 years, I had to then go out to friends of mine of similar practice and say, "Does this sound right to you? Because it doesn't make sense to me. Like, why are lawyers getting kickbacks on real estate deals? And it just doesn't sound right." And of course, they just affirmed to me that what I was feeling was right. They'd heard the similar thing as well, but at least I was on the same page, and it was good to have that. But after 30 years, you wouldn't think that something would hit me that I was unaware of or surprised by, but there you go, even after 30 years. And I had to check in with my friends to make sure that I was on track and that I wasn't like, okay, maybe this is the norm and I don't know about it and this is ethical. And yeah, sure enough, it wasn't. So don't worry, it can happen in your first year, it can happen 30 years later. So you're going to talk about strategies to make those informed, reasonable decisions, looking for conflicts of interest. When can I act for both sides of a transaction? When can I only act for one? And then the circumstances where you have to give independent legal advice. So, okay, I'm acting for this party, but this person's making a payment. Do they have to have legal advice, or can they just make the payment? Things like that. So they're going to go through that in your articling year and talk about those kinds of professional decisions and ethical decisions you're going to face. They're also going to talk about practice management. So this is prioritizing your desks. And for all of you that have practice, you all know that your desk is never empty. And God help you if your desk is empty, because it means that you've got no more work, and nobody wants to work anywhere where their work runs out. So but you have to learn how to manage that. And what's it like to go home and know that your desk is not cleared and know that all the work is not done? And how do you deal with that emotionally? I know for me, when I was an articling student, it was really difficult to get my head around ending my day, but it's okay that I still have 20 things to do, and that nobody was expecting it done in one day, that I had a month to do those 20 things, but how it just emotionally affected me and not having it done that day. So that's something that you have to deal with. You have to look at how you're going to manage your files. Are they going to be in a filing cabinet? Are they going to be all virtual? Are they going to be on a disk somewhere? How are we going to deal with checklists for procedures and policies and conflicts? How are we going to maintain financing and the trust account information? Who signs checks? Who has authority to sign checks? Do you need 2 signatures? Do you need 3 signatures? And those kinds of things have to be done. You've got to figure out your professional responsibilities and paying your Law Society fees and completing professional development plans and making sure that you have proper insurance. You've got to figure out how you're going to delegate tasks. And so training staff is really, really an important skill for lawyers to have, and how you deal with them if they disappoint you or make mistakes, or, you know, we're all human, we all make mistakes, but how you handle it is critical in your practice, and you want to get supervision on that. And talking about all of your billing collections, what do you do if somebody doesn't pay you? Have you collected the money up front? What's your firm policy on that? All of these things I imagine that you would have dealt with while you were practicing in another country. But again, you want to think about the culture here and the process here, because we might be completely different. In where you were practicing, it might have only taken a phone call, whereas in Alberta, it might take a demand letter, or you might have to go through the court process to enforce your account. And so you want to understand culturally how that could be different during your practice. You got to talk about customer relationship, because I can tell you, you can be the smartest lawyer in the world, but if you have customers who don't like you, you're not going to have a practice of law. And our gold medalist, so our best academic, completed his articles and never practiced again, because he loved the academics of law but hated the practice of law. And you have got to be able to relate to your clients and figure out how to motivate them and manage them. Are you going to be accessible 24 hours a day? Are you going to have your phone synced to your office so that people can text and email you and call you 24 hours a day? Or are you going to, when you leave the office, that you're leaving that office, and how you're going to deal with that? And what do you do if you don't like a client and they don't like you? And is this somebody that you're not going to deal with and not handle that file? Or do you have to learn how to manage it? Because one of the toughest things we learn to do is deal with coworkers we don't like, and deal with bosses we don't like, and deal with clients we don't like. And part of that practice and that articling process, and for years, is learning how to handle those situations in integrity, and that is for your highest and best purpose. I think that that's super, super important, that you get to a place where you don't have to take a client that you don't like, or you don't have to deal with a fact situation that you don't like. There is no requirement in Alberta that we have to take on a client, but learning when you have to and when you don't is super important. What your limitations are, what your restrictions are, what the firm policy is. I think it's really, really important how you address client concerns when they're raised to you. Do you immediately go to your boss? Do you solve them yourself? Do you address it? What happens next? And I think that those kinds of things are really, really important, because if we don't have clients, we don't have business. So I think it's really important that you learn about how to keep people informed and how to deal with our clients on an ongoing basis. And of course, you're always going to be that conductor. And I talk about that in the sense of that multitasking, because you have got to be able to research and balance the books and talk to clients and deal with your staff and make sure that you're handling a file to the best of your ability and in a professional, reasonable manner. And you've got to learn how to draft documents and how to draft pleadings and how to present yourself in front of court. And so sometimes it does feel like you're in an orchestra and you're playing all the instruments, but you're also conducting the orchestra as well. And so those are things that we want to make sure that you're learning, is how do I handle when I do have 20 things on my desk, and what do I do and what priority, and what needs to be done tomorrow and what needs to be done next week, and how do I keep track of my time if that's what my firm does. And so making sure that you're understanding how to conduct matters also becomes really important in that year. Alternative dispute resolution. And so this is becoming bigger and bigger, and we are hoping not to get to trial. And so now there is mandatory dispute resolution in most jurisdictions. In our provincial court level, you don't get a trial date until you've done some form of dispute resolution. And now even at the Queen's Bench level, there has to be some form of dispute resolution that occurs before you actually get a trial date. And really that was a matter of timing and managing the court schedule, because what they did is that they found that people were not actually trying to resolve a case before trial, or they were only trying to resolve the case on the eve of trial. And so court dates would be scheduled a year in advance, and nobody would really do anything until 2 or 3 weeks before the court date. And then they were madly scrambling, trying to settle it. And at the last minute, all these court dates weren't going through, which is just pushing back further and further court dates that actually could happen. And so now, with having alternative dispute resolution in place, they're finding that our trial dates are really the ones that are going to go ahead, that can't be solved by some other measure. And so they want to make sure that you understand that process as well. So not just going to court, but how can I resolve it without going to court? So once you've done that, so you've got your certification, you've done your year, you get to go to the lovely courthouse. This is just a picture of the Calgary courthouse, and get your bar call, which is really, really special. And in Alberta, we do it individually. And in BC, you do it as a group. And in Ontario, you do it as a group. And so all your whole class goes and everybody gets admitted at once. But in Alberta, like the territories, we have a very special process where you appear before a judge, and the judge knows stuff about you ahead of time, and your principal talks about your year and your character and your person, and really lets the court know why they think that you're going to be a good candidate for admission to the Law Society. Now, I've never seen a bar call not be granted if you're there, but it really is special, and family and friends come. And even now, when they do it virtually, all your family and friends can watch it virtually. And it was a really, really special occasion. And I've admitted a few students, and every time it's been super special to me. My principal became a judge, and my first articling student, he admitted to the bar. And so it was very serendipitous to me because I was his first student, and it's a very, very special occasion, and something that you should not take lightly, and realize that you're joining a group of individuals who really should be held at the highest standard, and be proud to be part of that group, because once you join, we're family. You're stuck with us for as long as you're practicing in Alberta. So you want to join it. So you know all the steps, right? Now we've gone through, how do I become accredited? How do I go through my articles? Now what are you going to do? So I'm going to give you a little bit of the reality check. And this is probably kind of like today's news from the provincial government, not the greatest news, but you're not only competing with students that have graduated from universities in Canada, you're competing with Canadians who have gone overseas and graduated. Right now, our Alberta economy is not great. Our oil and gas industry has basically dissolved. We're looking to rebuild and get new technology. Law firms are cutting back. They are reconsidering whether or not they need the physical space that they have, because people have been working from home, and maybe our understanding of that everybody has to be physically in the office to work productively and earn a living is different. And so it's tough to find articling positions. Once you've got your accreditation, it's not easy. You may not be able to afford to go to law school or take that time to study and write for those exams. So there's a reality there that's really, really tough. And I don't want to discourage you from following that. I just want it to be a reality to you that you're competing with a lot of people for limited articles. And like I had said, in Ontario, they had such a huge number of students who couldn't get articling positions. They created that program. And I don't think it's going to be the last of programs like that to get people having the practical experience they need to practice law. So what do I suggest? First, you need to learn about Canada's culture and your city's culture and your province's culture. So immerse yourself in it, try and understand it, the issues that people are facing. How is Alberta dealing with oil and gas that is no longer rampant? We used to have 200 international oil and gas companies drilling for oil up in Fort McMurray, and now we have 3 Canadian companies drilling, and that's it. And the prices of homes in Fort McMurray have gone from $650,000 to $250,000 because nobody's buying them, because nobody's living there. And this was a city that people were renting out their garage for $5,000 a month because they didn't have enough room for everyone. And so that whole culture has changed. And Calgary, being head office space for oil and gas companies, and now those oil and gas companies aren't here, has a lot of vacancy in our downtown core. And how does that affect our economy? And so I think it's really important that you immerse yourself in that culture and understand it, because it would help you with a lot, avoid disappointment if something was available or not available, just because right now our economy is different and shifting. Second, you got to gain some experience in the area of law that you think you're interested in. And I don't care if you volunteer, if you practice as a paralegal, if you work at the courthouse or the law library or the university, go to legal aid, go watch court, join the Canadian Bar Association, subsections, and ultimately you're going to be attending virtual meetings for now, but physical lunch meetings in the future. I think it's really, really important to gain some experience, because you want to understand, is this a place I want to work? Is this the area of law that I want to practice in? And if you're out there volunteering or working as a paralegal or working at the courthouse, you're really going to get a good feel for that understanding and knowing what would be good for you. So I think it's really important to get some experience, especially in the area of law that you think you want to practice in. Again, I think you should research. I think that's really important in the area of law that you're interested in. And so what's the latest cases that are about that area of law? So if I want to practice tax law in Canada, am I finding out what the latest tax decisions are and who's arguing those decisions? And if I apply to that law firm, can I mention that decision or that judgment that they obtained? Because that's something that we're looking for, that not only do you know what the law firm is that you're applying to is all about, but what did they do and what impresses you? And ultimately, isn't that where you want to work, at some place that impresses you? So do that research and find out, what is that firm about? What do they care about? What are their cultural values? What are their types of sponsorships that they do? What kinds of things do you like about them? And if it's tax law, then start looking up the tax law lawyers and start reading the decisions that they're getting from their practice, and then focus in on that practice and those lawyers to apply for, if that's what you want. And same with criminal or corporate or family or whatever it is that you're interested in. Don't just stand back and say, hi, I'm new to the country. I don't know anything about you, and I don't know anything about the law currently, but I'd really like to work for you, because it isn't going to work in this economy where it is so competitive to find jobs. So do that research. Fourth, I think you should start networking. Absolutely. Other international lawyers, other practicing lawyers, your potential clients. So if you want to practice in family law, how am I going to connect with family lawyers? Obviously not in the next 4 weeks, but after that, can I go for coffee with a family lawyer? Is this type of person that I like? If I'm in the Canadian Bar Association and we're back to having lunches, if I go to that subsection meeting, are these the type of people I want to be? And I think that is a huge part of figuring out where you want to be. And you don't want to just work for the sake of working. You want to love what you do and love the people that you work with and be proud of the work that you're doing. So make those connections, find those people that can help you build that personal brand. And even if that means 3 years from now, when you might start practicing, work on that process and build those connections. And finally, when you're thinking about those firms, find out if their goals are the same as your goals. Are they the type of people that you like? What do they stand for? What do they believe in? And I think, nothing makes me crazier or hit the delete button faster than when I get an application for an associate position or an articling job where somebody wrote me a cover letter for something that we don't even do. So, I really love family law and I'd like to work with your firm. And we don't touch a family law file. That's not something our firm works with. And so to me, you've told me everything I need to know about you in your resume and in your cover letter. I know that if you're writing to me about family law, that you're lazy, that you don't care about your work, and you really don't care about my firm. So why would I care about hiring you, right? Make sure that you're aligning your resume to the people that you want to work with and apply to the people that you work with. Don't just apply to every law firm out there and go through the legal directory and try to get a position anywhere. If you want to do family law, if you want to do criminal law, if that's where you practiced before, then research those firms, research what they believe in, and tailor your resume and your cover letter to that firm specifically. At least it will give you the chance to have somebody look at it and go, okay, this person knows what's going on. They're detailed, they're researched, and I know if I hire them, they're going to be careful. And so I think that that's super important. And I can tell you it's a common complaint that I hear from my colleagues, because now we are the partners and we are the people looking at those resumes. And we want to make sure that you're going to at least take the time and attention to write a good cover letter and know something about the firm that you're applying to. So I think that's really, really important. And then again, make sure your speaking and your written communication skills are excellent, because while you're giving a presentation like this, you're going to say and you know, let me look, or excuse me. But when you're in front of a court or in front of a client, there is no room for that. And you want to make sure that your speaking skills are clear and concise, and that you can get your point across, and that your clients have faith in you, that you speak with a confident voice, that you're not stuttering or looking all over the place or wringing your hands and looking down, that you have both that physical presentation as well as the oral presentation to be commanding in the room. And so practice that. Practice your interviews, practice having conversations at the dinner table about different subjects. Practice your ability to communicate effectively so that your point comes across, because those interviews and then those client skills become really, really critical. So if the court can't understand you or your client can't understand you, it's going to be tougher for you to build that relationship. And I'm not saying that because I do understand how hard it is to learn another language. But if you're here and practicing, it really does become important. And I have known people who have lived and born and raised in Calgary, and they get up in front of the court and they can't communicate well, and they should just never be in front of the court, and they should learn that about themselves and understand it. And other people who have such an eloquence that they should be on TV, they speak with such commanding attention. And so just keep in mind that that communication ability is really, really important. Finally, again, like I've said all along, make a good impression, make your cover letter, make your resume strong, tailor it to the person that you're writing to, make them feel that they can't live without you. If you want to find a good articling position, go in knowing everything about that firm, write your cover letter about how you can help them. Especially during COVID-19, I think that and people are losing their jobs, it's really important that the thought in your head is, how can I make myself more valuable to my employer? That a sense of entitlement that they owe me this job, they don't. Nobody owes you anything. You want to make yourself valuable. So the person who goes that extra mile, who says, you know what, I know that it's not my job to organize this shelf, but it was messy and I organized it because I can't stand looking at it, makes themselves valuable, because, oh my God, thank God I've been looking at that messy shelf myself. And I wished somebody would fix it because I haven't had time to do it. And thank you. You've just made yourself valuable to me. And it's little things like that, you know, creating precedents, it's organizing things, but just thinking while you're working and while you're applying for the job, how can I make myself valuable to this employer that they are never going to want me to go anywhere else than where I am. So I think that that's really important too, because that's what I'm looking for. I want someone who wants my job and wants to do it better than me. And I want them to show me that they can do that. So it's not enough to have to just talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. So now I'm here for questions, because we are right 5 minutes over. Sorry.
No, Denise, I have to tell you this. I want to give you a big round of, like, it's applause for you. I have never ever seen anybody go into such minute details to help newcomers. You have spent so much time on this. I really appreciate this. So what I'm going to do is, I know we are over time, but it's fine. I think people are loving this. So I need to stop the Facebook Live. So I will say bye-bye to Facebook Live, and you can say bye-bye to Facebook Live audience too, but we will continue with the Zoom. So type in your questions in the chat box and we'll be taking questions now.
Awesome.